Good evening. I'd like to call to order the meeting for Bedford Township for July 2nd, 2019. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, if Pastor Lee Herbert could come on up. He's with Abundant Life Ministry. Could open us up in prayer.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for having me. And the reason I'm willing to do this prayer, Paul, is because I believe this is how we start to get America back together, is through prayer. So thank you for having me. You bow your heads with me. Father God, in the holy name of Jesus Christ, tonight, as you have minds come together, Father, to make decisions for our community and for our world, I ask you to give them the wisdom that they will need from above and give them the opportunity to come together so that we could start to build something that you would be proud of. I ask for this blessing in the holy name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and I'll see you again. I'm going to take off. I got 2 more things to do. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, item number 2 on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
Support.
Okay, motion and supported by Mr. Clemens. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mrs. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Montry?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Hirschberger is absent. Mr. Perrone?
Aye, and the motion passed 6-0. Item 3 is the consent agenda. The agenda committee recommends to A, approve and place on file the minutes of the June 18, 2019 regular meeting of the Bedford Township Board. B, appoint Barry Buschmann to the Fire Board of Appeals for a first term ending 6/30/2020.
Motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Support.
Motion is supported by Mr. Francis. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Ms. Tinneberry?
Yes.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mr. Montry?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
And Mr. Perrone?
Aye, and the motion passed 6-0. Item 4, we have presentations. A, Todd Williams, Senior Counsel for Lean and Green, Michigan, Property Assessed Clean Energy, PACE, and request for approval of a resolution of intent to establish a PACE program and call a public hearing. Todd, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. Good evening, members of the board. As mentioned, my name is Todd Williams. I'm Senior Counsel with Lean and Green, Michigan. We are a PACE administrator for 40 jurisdictions across Michigan. One of the wonderful things about Michigan PACE is that many jurisdictions can band together and be jointly administered under one uniform program. And we as an organization, as a company, take that on behalf of our member jurisdictions. What brings me here tonight is one of your property owners is interested in undertaking commercial PACE project. The YMCA, Francis Family YMCA, is looking to improve their assets, replace an awful lot of aging equipment that is at its end of life, and do so in a cost-effective manner. Why we need you is the property assessed portion of property assessed clean energy in order to induce lenders to come into the market and lend money to our local commercial property owners. There is a bit of a hook. They get an added layer of security to their loan in the form of tax assessment. All of this is done with no money out of the hands of local government. It is all private capital going to a private property owner, and really is kind of an added layer of security to bring economic development dollars into your community. I'm here to address any questions or answer anything that may pop up, and specifically to ask that we undertake the first part of the process to enact PACE here in Bedford Township, which is the passage of a resolution of intent to establish. And all it does is put into the public forum a program report, which would control the program if it is enacted later on, and calls for a public hearing on that program report so that you will have more time to digest and ask questions, but also members of the public can come forward and ask any questions and make any comments they may have. So,
Comments from board members, questions? Mr. Steiner?
So right offhand, you say there's of course no money out of pocket from government dollars. So where's your money going to come from? I know you said private investment, but how is that going to be taken in? How do you, whether you advertise for it or program, how does that work?
Within our program, we've attracted roughly 14 commercial-paced lenders from across the nation to work within the Michigan marketplace. There is one already interested and attached to this particular project, Greenworks Lending, which is out of Connecticut. They actually grew out of the Connecticut Green Bank and have been doing commercial pace for years now. So it's a good quality lender who's done projects elsewhere, also accomplished projects here in Michigan, but comes from a governmental background, so they really do have an understanding of nonprofits and governments. So it is private enterprises who bring in the money. As far as Lean and Green Michigan, we only get paid on projects that close, and the property owners are well aware of our fees. They are part and parcel of the project, and we have plenty of projects and sunk time on things that will never come to fruition, and we're happy to do it.
So the last question, you did say that there's no money out of the government pocket, but you used the word there's a hook. So what's the real hook?
Bad word.
I mean, I got to ask the question. So maybe we use a different word, but if you say there's a hook, people are going to take that and say, oh, wait a minute, there's a catch here. What's going on? So
Sure. Well, and you are extending a governmental power on behalf of one of your commercial property owners, and a lender who's coming in. So there is always the very remote risk that there becomes a commercial property with an assessment attached to it that nobody wants to buy when the YMCA fails to make a payment and gets foreclosed upon. It is an extremely remote area. Greater Toledo YMCA is fairly robust. The underwriting that will undergo the project, not only from our end, but also from the lenders, is very robust, and the program requirements are there. There is the possibility that a foreclosure were to happen, and that the government is going to extend funds in order to enact the foreclosure. Within the special assessment agreement, which will control the individual project, all of those funds are shifted back onto the lender and or the property owner to reimburse our member jurisdictions. We don't undertake a project where we're going to, at the end of the day, put you at any more risk than we possibly can get to. We're happy to have lenders come in and lend in our marketplace. We think for the honor and the privilege of having the added layer of security, they get to bear an awful lot of the risk. So,
I mean, YMCA, it's been a great project since the beginning, but I just had to ask those questions.
I'm always happy to address them.
Mr. Montry?
So are the loan payments made through their property taxes then?
Within Michigan pay statute, there are two different avenues for which payments that can be made and collected. One is back on the tax bill and through the process of local government. We really do not recommend it. None of our member jurisdictions have taken this pathway. The one that was close because a particular deal wanted it was going to add, I believe, 2% as a fee for the collection. Michigan pay statute allows for the direct collection by the lender, so we recommend that pathway. Let them do the work of billing the YMCA twice a year and collecting the money. That way it's not, they're happy to do it because the money's then not passing through multiple hands. They get it a little faster. They bear a little bit more cost on their end. It makes it easier for member jurisdictions. And essentially, if all goes well, we will close the project. And the next time you'll hear about the project is 15 to 20 years down the road when the assessment is fully paid off and we're here to clear it from the tax records.
Do you have a question, Ms. Tinnery?
No, I don't have a question. I want to recognize Lori Spiegel. Todd is, of course, an attorney for PACE, which is, in my opinion, a wonderful opportunity for us to be the mechanism that allows the YMCA to save lots and lots of money through their utility bills with their pool and all that running all the time and their lighting, and it's amazing. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity to be a good neighbor at no cost to us. But Lori is the director of the Francis Family YMCA, and she's here tonight as well, along with, I don't have any questions, but I might have some answers.
Mr. Goldsmith?
My question is, on behalf of the township, let's say hypothetically that there's a default on the loan. What recourse does the note holder have upon default, and what risk does the township have? Because I need to wrap my brain around what risk there is to the township should a default occur. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And essentially the risk of default is like any other assessment, whether it's a sewer assessment, a water line assessment. It is an unpaid tax, and the risk for the property owner is that there is a foreclosure upon the property and a sale of the property to satisfy the unpaid tax. Most of the note holders are not particularly interested in going that route. They'd rather get their money versus having to go through a 3-year foreclosure process here in Michigan. The risk to
You're talking about tax foreclosure process.
tax foreclosure
Okay.
process. Yeah.
Okay.
This is like any other assessment, and it would be foreclosed upon as any other assessment.
Under the General Property Tax Act.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So they don't come after us, Phil, for the money, correct? Is what you're
That I
trying
don't,
to get at?
that's what I'm trying to understand. So what risk does the township have? Because the township would generally collect its money from the Monroe County Treasurer, from the revolving tax fund. So I'm trying to understand what risk the township has.
We normally would recommend that these projects fall outside of the revolving loan fund, that as you are not doing the collection of the assessments, and one of the reasons we favor the direct collection by the lender is to clearly separate that from anything you're getting out of the revolver, so there is no potential clawback from the county in the revolver. The lenders are happy with the direct collection and with that kind of level of risk. I would not want to expose you to a potential clawback from the county with that. I do think it's important also to stress that for a missed payment and a foreclosure, the amounts that are cleared through the sale are the past due assessments. So the remainder of the assessments would run with the land to the next property owner. So the potential exposure is somewhere between 1 and 3 years worth of payments, assuming the YMCA fails to make one payment, then just decides to not pay anything while they're in foreclosure. You're looking at roughly 2.5, 3 years worth of payments. So 6 out of 40 payments, which we also tend to limit to about 25% of the property value. So potentially 6/40ths of 25% of the property value being past due at the time of the sheriff's sale.
Okay, that makes some sense, but, okay.
Ms. Stinneberry?
Well, keep in mind, we're talking about the Francis Family YMCA that's located here in Bedford Township, but they're a branch of the Greater Toledo YMCA, which, they probably won't like me saying this, but they have millions. And so they're the ones that will be paying the loan, not this local branch. It goes through the Greater Toledo YMCA, and I mean, there is a risk. I'm not saying there isn't a risk, but I think the risk is very minimal.
Well, shoot, if they have millions, they should loan you the money.
I can
0%.
also, I can also say
They're not
this
loaning her
is,
the money. Keep in mind, it's not the local branch. They're getting the benefit, and also keep in mind our master plan calls for a greener
Oh,
Michigan plan.
I don't
so
disagree with it at all.
We've been trying to go greener locally, in this building and in the library, and we're just encouraging that as the master plan has called for us to do. But it's not this local Y that has to prosper. They could be losing money, but the Greater Toledo YMCA is the one that's going to be on the hook.
I will also say they're extending themselves quite a bit. This is one of 2 projects within Michigan that Greater Toledo YMCA is undertaking. The other is on the store camp up in Jackson County. And in my evening job, I also am outside counsel for the Toledo Port Authority's energy program, the PACE district in Northwest Ohio. And I can tell you the Greater Toledo enacted PACE projects on 5 of their properties in Northwest Ohio. So this is one project out of 7 buildings that they're undertaking as a comprehensive, kind of across all of their assets. So it's being done by Gem Energy, and I'm very comfortable with the partners on this deal, that the project looks very favorable.
I did look, and how many actually counties utilize the PACE program in Michigan? I think I read like 25 or something.
I think it's 24, 25. I always forget how many counties versus townships and municipalities we have. Michigan, we're able to work with all levels of local government, and we're happy to work with them.
So Phil, would you be comfortable with us moving forward?
At this point in time, yes. And I think each project has to be measured on its own merits, but this project, to start the process, to adopt the resolution and to schedule the public hearing, yes. Yes.
Right, this is simply going forward to have a public hearing. If for some reason we have an outcry from the public and we change our mind, we're not bound by anything by having the public hearing.
So yes, to start the process, further investigate it, make sure the board's comfortable with it, fully understands what exposure there is.
So with us adopting this, does this really open it up to any business being able to use the PACE program within?
The model docs that I've provided, that we've provided, what we encourage our member jurisdictions to do is to adopt a program that's contingent with your jurisdiction. We'll open it up to any of your commercial property owners, but each project coming in is going to have to meet the statutory tests. So it becomes an available tool for economic development once it's passed, but it's not an automatic that each property owner gets money. We're going to evaluate it. We're going to have to find a lender who will match up with it, and we'll be happy with their underwriting. So it becomes available, but it's not automatic.
So I have 2 questions. So who, in that instance, even for additional properties, who actually approves each loan? Is it PACE, or Lean and Green? Is that who, or is it the lender, or who's actually approving?
All of the above. Lean and Green Michigan will function on your behalf to review projects, to shepherd property owners through the process, to match them up with potential contractors, to match them up with potential lenders, and try to develop a good project. At the end of the day, you are a party to the project, and without the township's approval in moving forward, we will not move forward with it. We will reach out and work with whoever you appoint as our point person to touch base with early on in the process, make sure it's a property owner you'd be willing to move forward with, and then we will work through the process and touch base with you as often as you want. I have some member jurisdictions where we give a monthly report of all activities of potential projects going on. I have other ones who never want to hear my voice until I have a fully baked project wrapped up for them to sit down with me and read through and then approve or not. So it's really kind of how much you want to hear from us and how many projects and property owners we can help. But we are there as a resource for you to handle this element, of your economic development, and we're happy to meet with property owners. We're happy to meet with contractors. Happy to meet with anybody, honestly.
My other question is just for clarification. If you can clarify why especially if it's owner to lender, direct, why the municipality needs to be involved at all, why the resolution and why, just to clarify that.
Purely, it's the carrot that brings the money to the table. PACE lenders come in and are willing to lend money, 15 to 25 years at a fixed interest rate, which sometimes is higher than money that property owners can get elsewhere, sometimes lower percentage-wise, but it's a fixed rate, long-term, 100% financing of a project. In order to do that, they want the security of the tax assessment. They can't create a tax assessment, nobody can but local government.
So that's their safety net,
Yeah,
more or less?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's why I asked if it was paid through the property taxes, that was my initial understanding was that's their safety net. They gotta pay their taxes. If that's attached to this loan, do I have a correct understanding of that?
you do, yeah.
Okay.
So so for instance, I'm working on the Store Camp YMCA project right now. Spent about 3 hours digging through the materials this afternoon to make sure that, I'm not short of anything in my folder before I talk with Jackson County. And, I'm still missing a few pieces, so I need to reach back. But at the end of the day, what will be created is a special assessment agreement, which is, the agreement between the township, the YMCA, and the lender, which creates the assessment, controls the flow of funds, controls what happens if there is a default from one of the parties. But that is the security net. Typically, it is signed and closed in tandem to a loan document or a promissory note or some other loan doc being offered from the lender, just by two-party between the lender and the property owner.
It's like being a cosigner, almost.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, you're extending a security interest for, the benefit of the lender and really for the benefit of the commercial property owners, because it's tough to get access to 20-year fixed interest rate.
Okay, I look for a motion.
First, we need to determine when the public hearing is going to be, because this is to set a public hearing. So is it, do you know how many days of publication? Is it 15 days, or is it?
The minimum that, we recommend is a week.
Okay, so there's nothing in the statute that says,
No, the minimum is a week. We tend to default to whatever our local member jurisdictions are comfortable with.
what would
So-
you say?
I think we should follow what we follow, like on a rezoning for a public hearing for a rezoning. So we're going to have to know what the Monroe Evening News schedule is to
Would you
use that
say
as a guide.
15 days?
Yes.
So then it should be the 1st of August.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what that date is, do you?
August 6th.
Okay. Okay, I'll be happy to make the motion. Nancy, I'm going to be taking wording from 1, 2, and 4 from the resolution. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Okay, I move that we approve the PACE program as presented, which reduces energy costs, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, stimulates economic development, improves property values, increases employment in the township. Also that, sorry, I'm not going to use 2, that we resolve that it is our intent to join the Lean and Green Michigan program and to utilize Lean and Green Michigan LLC as PACE administrators. And I further move that we set August 6th at 7 p.m. as the day and time for the public hearing for such.
Support.
Okay, motion is supported by Mr. Clemens. Discussion? I just want to say that's what this board is all about. We're always looking to help businesses and look for ways to attract businesses, and I think this is a good tool for us to have. So, could you call the roll, please?
Ms. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Montry?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
And Mr. Peroni.
Aye, the motion passed 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In the meantime, between now and then, if there are any questions, feel free to reach out to me. We are happy to meet, we're happy to address, we're happy to email. So.
Do we have more of these in the, we can leave, just lay them there, I'll get them. Thank you.
Your phone number's on this paper, on the bottom? You leave your card? Okay. Okay, moving on to public comment. Comments limited to 2 minutes for board agenda items only. Come on up. Okay, seeing none. Moving on to staff reports. A request for approval of a resolution amending the 2019-2020 general fund budget. Mr. Francis?
This is a small amendment to account for the increase in cost for the Lewis Avenue streetscaping project. The budget, or the estimates came in a little higher than we had thought, and our share of the increase is $23,900. And that's the amount that we have adjusted the budget for the fiscal year 2019-2020 for that item. Anyone have any questions at this point? It's only one item we're changing.
Was that a motion? I'll support it.
I was going to say, if it isn't, I would like to make the motion that we do approve and adopt the a resolution to amend the budget for the general fund for fiscal year 2019-2020 as presented.
Support.
Okay, motion is supported by Ms. Tinnerberry. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll?
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mrs. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Montry?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
And Mr. Peroni.
Aye, and the motion passed 6-0. Okay, item 8A, request for approval of vouchers for payment. Mr. Francis?
I move that we approve the following vouchers in the general fund in the amount of $45,599.60. For the fire district operating fund, $11,574.80. For the police fund is $243.50. For the park fund, it's $37,874.67. For the fire equipment millage fund, the new fund, it's $19,734.89. For the transit system fund, it's $20,677 even. For the library fund, it's $2,651.28. For the water revenue fund, it's $1,288.03. For the Mohawk Trail SAD fund, it's $424.03. For the Lewiston Estates Special Assessment District Fund is $3,177.25. For the Downtown Development Authority Fund, it's $1,442.64. For the Sewer Operating and Maintenance Fund, it's $4,700.53. And for the Trust and Agency Fund, it's $1,200 even, for a grand total of $150,588.22. I'll support.
Motion is supported by Mr. Clemens. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Montry?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Tinneberry?
Aye.
And Mr. Peroni.
Aye, and the motion passed 6-0. Item 8B, request to rezone a portion of parcel number 5802-103-002-00, also known as 6225 Lewis Avenue, from R3 Single Family Residential to C3 General Commercial. Ms. Tinnerberry, you want to take this one?
I can take it. I think it's pretty well self-explanatory. It's the letter in the packet from Jody states that this has been ongoing since 2018, and in the process back then, it was determined that there needed to be a combination, land division split combination for this particular property, and so it had to be held up until now. They've submitted everything that they needed to the Alan Matlow, the assessor, and he has stated in this packet that he issued a review letter recommending to move forward for a decision from the Township Board on the requested rezoning. Once a decision is made, and should the request to rezone be approved, the land division process will continue to move forward. So I guess the motion should include that would take place. I was not on the planning commission back then, but I think that the whole packet is pretty well, I can attempt to answer any questions, but it's probably in the packet.
I
But
don't
if
think
you have
there's
questions-
I don't think there's anybody here representing the property, is there?
I don't know.
There is.
I wasn't around then. I wasn't around on the planning commission. I mean, I've been around for a long time, but around in that capacity.
Anybody
any
have any
questions?
thoughts or questions or comments? No? Seeing none? I look for a motion then.
Okay, I'm making a motion to approve the Patricia Braden request for rezoning of a portion of parcel number 5802-103-002-00 from R3 Single Family Residential to C3 General Commercial located on the west side of Lewis Avenue, south of Smith Road, formerly known as the State Line Nursery, otherwise known as 6225 Lewis Avenue, Temperance, Michigan, contingent upon a preliminary approval for, or not preliminary, but contingent upon the land division with legal description of the portion to be rezoned to be followed through with the assessor.
Support.
Okay, motion is supported by Mr. Clements. Discussion?
Okay, wait, is that sufficient, Phil?
That is sufficient. You may want to add in the recommendations of our planner as
Yes,
part
I
of
do.
that.
Yes, yes, I do.
I'll make a friendly amendment request that those be added, the Bedford Township Planner, also the Planning Commission recommendations as well.
I should have said for the viewing public's knowledge that this is in a commercial zoned area already, and it is near the Ohio state line.
With a plan,
I'm sorry?
like, and that they have a plan,
And they,
like, for the property, that they're not just, that they're
Okay.
not just changing the
the
zoning
problem,
arbitrarily.
I don't want that in the amendment
No.
because in a rezoning, you can't take what they have said they might do because there's no binding agreement for that.
Okay.
So when it's rezoned, if it's a site plan, that's different, but that doesn't come to this board. But in a rezoning, you can't
Okay.
stipulate. But thanks, Craig. I just say no.
Do you accept?
Accept Mr. Steiner's, yes.
Okay, could you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Montroy?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
And Mr. Peroni.
Aye, the motion passes 6-0. Okay, item 8C, request for approval of a change to the Consumer's Energy Standard Lighting Contract. There's 2 motions needed for this. Ms. Jen, if you want to kind of explain it, does Trudy handle this, and she kind of let you know what was going on, so.
Well, Consumer Energy is changing over all of our high-pressure sodium electric lights into the LED lights, and they're doing it as the lights go out, as they need to be replaced. So this contract is just, one is to remove a portion of the high-power lights, and the other one is to install the new ones. And instead of coming back every time they do an installation, in the future, what they're going to do is come back once a year with a change of the contract. But you have to update the contract with them each time they change out these lights. So they'll be, in the future, it will be just once a year, but they want to get this one done.
Comments or questions?
So did they already do these then?
These are the ones that have been done so far. And then as one blows, they're going to go out and change them over to the LEDs. It saves us money and makes us all go green. And then they'll keep it all together, and then at the end of the year, they'll come back with another change of contract.
Are we billed individually, like for the changes or whatever too? That's what I thought, but I was just like, it just seemed like change a contract after, like, after they already did it. It was just confusing.
You can, there's a list of the
Yeah,
ones
yeah,
they've
yeah.
changed already.
Well, that's what I was like. That's it.
It requires 2 motions because one is to remove the
Yes.
bulbs
Install.
and the other one is to put new ones in, correct?
Correct.
You gonna make a motion, Paul?
I'm trying to think of wording to do it. I move that we approve the revised contract with Consumer Energy for the removal of burned-out streetlights as presented in this contract.
Support.
Okay, motion and support of Mr. Clemens. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mrs. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Montry?
Aye.
And Mr. Peroni.
Aye, the motion passed 6-0.
And then a follow-up motion would be to approve the amendment or revision to the contract with Consumer Energy for the replacement of those bulbs as they burn out,
Support.
as presented.
Okay, motion and support of Mr. Clemens. Discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mrs. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Montry?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
And Mr. Peroni.
Aye, the motion passed 6-0. Item 8D, request for approval of additional truck route and engine brake signs. We've had a lot of complaints come in to the office about Stearns Road. There's a lot of through traffic going through, which they shouldn't be doing that. So we've requested more signs through that area, and then the same thing for Douglas and Samaria. We need another engine brake sign put up there to keep the engine brake noise down. So here's the memo, here's the information on it, and the bill is $628 total and 30 cents, so.
I move that we approve this proposal as presented.
Second.
Motion in support of Mr. Steiner, discussion?
Yeah, I have it's just such a small amount, but a thought that I was having, like, I don't think it would apply to this maybe, but, like as discussed at the last meeting, for this kind of thing, does this need to have, obviously, $600, but like the adjustments to the budgets, like made prior to or after, or is that not a thing, or what?
Ms. Dinner?
I would imagine that our road budget has $628 in it, wouldn't you say, Mr. Francis?
Well,
You-
no,
as long
I'm
as
saying,
it's- As long as you
long as it
move the
doesn't-
money around within that department, you don't have to have a budget adjustment. It's when you go over what the budget approved in that department, then you have to adjust.
What he's saying for is we didn't budget for it
You didn't
during
budget for this.
times.
But it won't throw you over. When it will become an issue before this board is when we have an expenditure which would cause that line item to exceed its budgeted amount. That item, whatever that trigger is, would have to then come back and be approved. This would not cause a trigger because we're not exceeding the line item budget amount at this point.
I guess that's the question is, how do you know? Like, that's like my genuine question is, how do you,
Dave
obviously, that's what I'm saying, this is a bad
Dave will send-
example.
Dave will send
but-
a
No,
memo
it's-
out, and it'll be
Yeah.
on the next agenda.
Right,
Okay.
yeah. You'd always be alerted to it.
Like, I mean, similar to, I mean, what was it?
Yeah.
Like the earlier like for 6A. Like that,
Was that-
he's gonna put that out when it's going through.
And as a trustee, you always have the ability to call Dave
Yeah.
Manning and inquire on any line item that you feel like there may be an issue that you want to ask about.
Okay.
Craig, we don't approve a line item budget. We approve a fund or a department budget, fund budget. So you can move things, let's say you want to go to, not you, because the trustee budget is kind of tight.
Yeah.
But
You might
let's
wipe
say-
out our trustee budget with this expense.
Let's say,
Yeah, but
let's
that-
say the clerk wants to go to some conference that just came up, has got everything she wants to talk about and learn about, but she only has 2,000 in her travel budget or conference budget, but she's got extra money in some other place in her budget. She can move that around because we don't approve each item by itself. But, and so as long as this fits into the roads budget, we're okay.
Okay. That's all.
Good. Would you call the roll, please? Nope.
I just want to say that signs, I'm all for this. I also have received many calls from people that are upset about the trucks. But signs are only signs unless they're enforced. So I'm asking that the state police department be notified that we would like extra surveillance on these roads. If we're gonna put up the signs, we need to let the truckers know that we're not just putting up signs. Okay? Would you do that?
Would do that.
Okay, thank you.
And the reason you do that is to route those trucks, heavy trucks, down a road that was built for that. And a lot of our roads are not built for that, so we'd like to keep those heavy vehicles off of that
Right.
as much as we can. And you're right, you can have all the signs in the world, but if they disobey them and are not held accountable for doing that, then you've wasted money on the sign. So we need to be cognizant of that and work on it.
Okay, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Montroy?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
And Mr. Peroni.
Aye, and the motion passed 6-0. Item 8E, request for approval of a resolution regarding the authority over the Bedford Township Planning Department. Ms. Tinberry?
I think the memo is pretty well self-explanatory, but I feel as though there needs to be a policy in place. It's not just me. The MTA Red Book says that as a board, we need to have a policy for how things work. We already have an organizational chart that puts in place which department or which elected official has responsibility over which department. And so I would like to see this policy or a revision. I threw together something just for an opportunity for discussion, and I'm not tied or, wed to any part of it. If it needs to be changed by this board, then I'm open to that.
Well, I want to thank Nancy for bringing this up because I feel it is very important. Because I really don't know what the process is. So I've done a lot of digging, a lot of talking to MTA, a lot of reading, searching other communities, how they do it. I checked with Trudy, and the township has no formal written policy on who advances or ordinance or zoning with the attorney, who makes that decision to spend the money. In talking with MTA, they claim the planning department should report directly to the Board of Trustees. No one department should oversee that department. If something's going on and they have a request, they need to come to the board. So in my finding, after talking with Kathleen and the way they...
Kathleen?
What's that?
Who's Kathleen?
Kathleen Milhaupt, she's the attorney for MTA. She says the process is supposed to be done in the way of planning department gets a request for a solar field, and Bedford Township doesn't have an ordinance for that. At that moment, she needs to put a memo together. It's supposed to go on the township board agenda, come to this board first, okay? And then we approve to move forward because the board is the owner-operator. How it's been done is the planning department will get it, okay? They'll come talk to me or Trudy and say, hey, here's our issue. We collaborate. We start the process moving forward. We spend legal dollars with our legal team. It goes to planning, it goes to county planning, then it comes to the board. And at that time, this board could say, no, we don't want that. And so we've spent 2.5 months, we've spent legal dollars, and this board says no. So what they say is you come to the owner-operator first, they give you the red light, green light to move forward, or the red light to say no. And it's good for the business owner as well. Say the business is on a tight time frame, and we have a meeting next week, they would know, hey, this board wants to move forward in this direction of they want that ordinance, or they don't. And at that point, if we don't, it tells them pretty quick, hey, I know where I'm at with this. So I appreciate Nancy bringing this up because, it was an eye-opener for me, because quite frankly, I get a lot of phone calls, and, I would much rather just have it come to this board and we make a decision quickly and move forward, so. I'm not so sure the way it's written up here, that it should go to any one person. I talked to Phil and he said, we could have it to where, the planning gets a request and it comes to Paul, Trudy, and Paul, and we kind of put our heads together, do we want to move forward? But then it's like, what if we're not in agreement? It shouldn't go to just Trudy, it should come to the board. Does that add another layer? Potentially, because now if they're on a tight frame, you say we get a request tomorrow from somebody that wants this ordinance changed, and at that point, typically, we'd go to work on it. We'd go to work on it, and now we would have to wait till the next board meeting to find out if this board even wants to move forward. So that could potentially be the only hangup I see. Phil, do you, I've talked to you about it as well, because you guys had a little disagreement with what MTA was telling me. And I did put in front of everybody's desk the MTA General Law Ordinance Checklist, and it is very good. It kind of spells out, the stuff, so.
Well, if you use a zoning ordinance amendment as an example, there's a procedure that the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act specifically sets forth, and you all know that. It's public hearing on a proposed ordinance amendment, then it goes to county planning. First, our planning commission at a public hearing will make a recommendation, then it goes to county, and then it comes to this board. So I don't disagree with the information that MTA has given. From a practical standpoint, if a request is made for a particular use that's not permitted by our ordinance, either as a principal permitted use or as a special use, then ultimately this board's going to be the body that makes the decision on any ordinance. So if you want to streamline it, and I think it takes pressure and obligation that really is hollow off of an individual board member, because the board can't act through an individual. The board has to act collectively together. So one way to handle it is if say for instance our clerk gets a request from a property owner, I would like to look at this particular use in this particular zoning district. She may not have the answer, or any other of the board members. So practically what you could do is refer it right to planning. Planning could prepare a memo to the board. You get it on the next agenda to the board, and then the board makes a decision together whether you want to engage legal counsel to draft an ordinance amendment, if that's the case, or
But in any given situation, say somebody does come to Paul or Trudy or myself, automatically we direct them to planning. I mean, and then at that point, planning puts together a memo if we don't have an ordinance. I'm saying that's how, moving
Oh,
forward,
okay.
it should be.
yeah.
Because typically, they'll go to planning, and if we don't have an ordinance, my phone's blowing up from property owner or the realtor. Well, can't believe Bedford doesn't have this or that. And at that point, it's like, oh my gosh, what do we do? So we move forward. But
I think
I like it to be able to, where planning moves forward.
it's a good
Without me,
order.
without Paul, without Trudy, and then this board, the owner-operator acts.
It's a good orderly way to do it.
I think it's
You're
great.
sending it to really the experts that you have hired to do that job. They can give an opinion. They can speak intelligently with the applicant and say, this is what you can do in this zoning district, this is what you can't do. And if it would require an amendment to allow it, and if the board wanted to do it, best to send them to prepare a memo, inform and educate the property owner or the agent for the property owner, send a memo to the board can consider it at its public meeting and decide whether that's a direction you would want to move. And then you've got some options from there. You can say, well, let's have, you could, if you wanted to, have the planning commission take a look at it. Or you could, if you wanted to, have your planning department in conjunction with your attorney draft a proposed ordinance amendment. You could have it come back to the board, take a look at it, see if it's something that you think is appropriate, then initiate the public hearing process through the planning commission. So you could branch off from there, but to start and to take pressure off individual board members, I like the idea of sending it to planning, use your professionals, get a memo drafted and get it back to you, and then you can make a decision.
Mr. Steiner?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I know a number of years ago, a lot of us committed to working with our planning commission, trying to get some of our ordinances also updated, not just new ones created when there isn't one. and this would be a perfect opportunity. Somebody comes in and says, I want to do X. And maybe there is an ordinance that they're close with, but they fall just outside of it. And if we direct it right to planning, planning might say, well, you can do this, this, and this, so if you change one little part of your plan, you might still fit into the ordinance. That's one area. Another one is if they fall completely outside the ordinance, then that's where planning commission, or I'm sorry, the planning department would draft that memo, send it to us, give us a copy of the ordinance that falls in that category, and highlight the areas that would be in violation. That's the key. It's because instead of that, somebody say, well, they want to do this, and then just say, read through the ordinance. So we'd have planning actually highlight what does not fit, or something is not clear. I mean, because there's some things that are gray, because, example, it may say, well, you can't do this, this, and this. But it doesn't clearly say you can't do that. And somebody might come back and say, well, the ordinance doesn't say I can't do it, but it doesn't say you can do it either. So we've got a few situations, I know, where that's come up too. So I think it's probably a good process, and it was a good point to bring this, Nancy, especially since we've all talked about our ordinances. I think one of the other areas that's going to come up with this, especially we make this change, right now we work on a complaint-based ordinance process. And this points out sometimes that maybe somebody wants to do something and we find out, we've got an ordinance out there and there may be 12 violators in the community. But if it's not a complaint against it, then we don't enforce it. So if we do something with another ordinance, if we create one that says you can do X, those other ones are going to have to make sure they comply then with that new ordinance. They can't step outside of that bounds. But I think it's a good idea to take it off of individuals, get it to the planning department to initiate it, and like Mr. Goldsmith said, let the experts take a look at it, get their eyes on it first, make the recommendations off the current ordinance if there is one, and then proceed. If there's not one, then discuss how we proceed through either legal to draft one or planning commission, et cetera.
Ms. Tinberg?
Well, my purpose in coming up with this was to attempt to eliminate the politics. And so I think that, okay, well, I don't know who you're meaning when you say experts, because there aren't experts. I mean, with all due respect, Phil, you can't be an expert on every single ordinance. You can read it through and make some decisions, but we don't have experts. But the people that are put in place to review ordinances, to initiate the master plan update, to do things, with ordinances, is the planning commission. You're talking about protecting some individuals. This was meant also to protect the planning department. I've met many times with the planning department since I've been on the planning commission, and they are totally frustrated because they don't feel they have the power or I should say authority or ability to call the attorney and say, what do you think about an amendment to this ordinance? They feel as though they're responsible to the planning commission. They take their things to the planning commission, which in my mind is the place where they should go. Like you said, we appoint these people, we pay them to do a job, and they meet together, and they should, based on the current ordinance and what they have seen and continually talk about regarding the master plan and other ordinances, they are the ones that are the closest and have the most frequent affiliation with our ordinances, not general code ordinances, I'm talking zoning now, with zoning ordinance and what can fit into a certain zoning, C3, that this is how this came up. I mean, there was an applicant who wanted something in C3. The planning department told them no several times. No, it doesn't fit our ordinance. No, it doesn't fit our ordinance. And so they were put in this position of having to call the attorney, it was just, it was an unfortunate situation all the way around, and I want to protect them as well. I don't want to put them in a position of having to decide what goes where, and since they are working more closely with the Planning Commission, I think it should be not a memo to the board, but brought up as an agenda item on the Planning Commission's agenda. The Planning Commission discusses it with you know, like I said, this board doesn't have reference to the ordinances like the Planning Commission does, and it's true. The planning department can give us a copy of the ordinance that it is pertaining to, but for us, from Wednesday to Tuesday, read that ordinance and get a full understanding of that ordinance. I just think that it's better suited to go to the Planning Commission. And then the Planning Commission makes a decision to send it to the Township Board, and the Township Board authorizes moving forward with an amendment or not. We like it the way it is, and we don't want to change it because also the Planning Commission has experience to know that it has opened up other topics in that area, have opened up discussions that may cause other problems. So I think that they're better educated on the ordinances than the Township Board. And then with regards to your comment about we're going to talk about that in terms of general code ordinance, in terms of being either complaint-based or waiting.
The problem is with that, with it going to planning first, you could potentially be spending $5,000 on legal, I mean, like Mulch King was a 9-month process.
If they go to planning, excuse me for interrupting, but if they go to Planning Commission, they have to pay the fee to go to Planning Commission. They don't have any pay.
That's what I'm saying, but they're spending legal dollars to, you know, to come up with the ordinances and stuff like, I'm just saying, the business owner would know pretty quickly the direction of the board, the decision maker, because planning only makes a recommendation to this board. So at the end of the day, you're talking a 6-month possible process of a business waiting to get to this point and us say no and kibosh the whole thing.
I don't see how you mean 6 months, because planning meets every other week that the Township Board.
So you're saying it would go to planning and then to this board?
Yeah, the very next
Back
meeting.
to planning and then to county planning?
Well, planning would have to hold the public hearing if you're going to change.
What I'm saying though, it's the process would be Karen and Jody take it to planning, put it on the agenda, and from there it goes to Township Board, and then it goes back to planning, then county planning, then back to Township Board?
It has to go for a public hearing to change it.
I get that, but I'm saying, I think you're adding.
You can't shorten that. You can't shorten that.
I know, I'm saying I think you're adding a couple steps though by doing the way you're saying.
Well, I see just one step. On Wednesday it goes to planning, the next Tuesday it comes to the Township Board. I mean, the planning department gets it down to the clerk to get on the agenda. I mean, I don't see how that's.
I think I understand what Nancy's saying. We're talking about what the process is before the attorneys are authorized to draft an ordinance, for example. So my only concern was, what if it's stalled at planning? But what Nancy's suggesting, that adds one extra step and wouldn't inordinately delay things. So someone goes to our planning department, they go over the ordinance, our planning department representatives go over the ordinance, then they send a memo or information to our planning commission. Our planning commission would then make a recommendation. As long as they're obligated to make a recommendation, either yes or no, and send it to the board, then the board, the elected officials, make a determination as to whether an ordinance amendment should be drafted. Then you send it to the attorneys, the amendments prepared, at that point, then it goes back to planning, to the planning department who
That's what I'm
organizes.
saying, you're adding.
You're adding one step.
One extra step with
Yeah,
that.
you're adding one
If you
step.
come to the township board first, you know what I'm saying, then it could go, I'm just saying, we don't want to add any more layers to, or red tape to people getting stuff done or moving forward. I mean, it's up to the board, but I would just, you know,
I don't think the board has the knowledge or experience to make that kind of a decision. That's why I think the planning commission is,
I would think that this board is very well versed on how to make those decisions.
okay,
With
politically.
I'm not saying-
Politically, yeah, I get it.
No, not politically. I mean, we all work with it, you know, for years. It's not, you know. It's up to the board. I just don't want to add any layers that we don't have to. We're all about cutting the red tape and moving things, you know, in a streamlining position, and now we're going to add another layer to it.
It's a board decision. If you're going to develop a policy, yes, it is a board decision.
But 100% though, it should not, all information requests, questions from the public or contractors be sent to the clerk. That should not be happening.
Agreed.
They should be sent to the appropriate planning, building, and then move forward in appropriate. They shouldn't be going through the clerk. Ms. Tenderberry?
Well, in the past, they've gone to the supervisor,
No, they haven't.
so, in the past.
I don't get
they've gone
requests to me.
the
I get phone calls.
Supervisor.
Oh, in the past
So-
before me?
Do I have the
You don't.
floor?
Well, be clear with what
Seems
you're
like-
saying.
Are you the parliamentarian here, Mr. Goldsmith? Do I have the floor?
You have the floor.
Thank you. There have been occasion that I am aware of that they have gone to the supervisor. My only point in mentioning the clerk is that the clerk in our organizational chart is the one responsible, or the one that the planning department goes to, talks to, councils, whatever. It's the clerk that oversees the planning department. That was my point in mentioning the clerk, because she is already, by way of our organizational chart, responsible to work with the planning commission.
But according
Planning
to-
department.
But according to MTA, the clerk should not be. And they were surprised that she was, so I would recommend that they aren't anymore. And when I get calls or memos, you say, everything I get goes directly to planning. The first call I'm making is to planning. What's going on? They're calling me. Oh, they explain the situation, and we work together. And I don't want to work with it. They do it. They handle it. And that's why I say it's good. Everything go to the appropriate places, then it comes to the board first. And then we can make the decision, and then they know, the business owner, pretty quick of the direction. But, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we recommend that Phil kind of draft something? I mean, what's the board's direction? I mean, do we want to see it go from planning to the board, back to I mean, or do we want to see it go from planning to the board, and then from the board, you start the whole?
I don't know that I have an answer, yay or nay. I think my position is whatever we feel like is the most expedient way to assist people walking in the door to get answers as quickly as possible without wrecking the system or breaking the rules is what we want to aim for here. So I just don't, I think philosophically, it's an interesting question as to what's faster, the planning commission first or this board first.
Well,
And you
I'm
can make
just
some
saying, by
arguments either way.
going to planning commission first, you're adding one step.
Agreed, completely.
I mean, it's pretty easy to figure out. If you even come to the board, from what we've done in the past, even coming to this board first is adding a step from what we've done.
I think the interesting part about it is, Paul, is that on high level, probably 80% of what we hear, that's probably true. The ones where we bog down and where they become very detailed, I think there would be some benefit to planning getting it first. Unfortunately, it's not an all or nothing situation. We're trying to figure out which is the best, which will statistically, solve most of it. But I think you could make an argument. There's cases and instances we hear where clearly it would have been expeditious for planning to get it first because they have a historical and can dig into the weeds that we don't get. And I think Nancy is right to some degree there. But I think the bulk of it, I think largely this board would not struggle or have a problem.
But what I'm saying is something as simple as, hey, do you want a microbrewery in your township or not? This board, at the end of the day, is gonna say yes or no, and right
Agreed.
away, we could say, hey, we do want a microbrewery in the township. Okay, start the process. Or, I mean, there could be something like, a solar field. You know, that's something this board might not want in this township, and are we gonna write an ordinance? This board might right away say, no, let's not waste the time and the energy and the money.
No, I think you can
I'm
also make an
saying-
argument from a disclosure standpoint that, you know, we have on the agenda an initial approval for whatever you call this board for someone to move forward. That certainly allows the citizenry and the public to be aware of things very early in the funnel, so that if there is a backlash or resistance that we're not aware of, you know, our residents have a longer period of time to make us aware of that because it hit our agenda, you know, earlier. So I think, you know, there's some benefits that way as well.
Ms. Tinberry, Ms. Tinberry?
It's been stated here tonight that when a call comes in, that person, whatever, is sent to planning. Okay, so it goes to planning, they talk to planning, they find out whether or not the ordinance allows for what they want to do. If the ordinance allows for what they want to do, that's, the next step is, you know, putting together a packet for planning, goes to planning, doesn't come here. So I don't understand what the extra step is. And the extra step to me is they come in, they talk to the planning department, and the planning department has to send it to the township board, which might be 2 weeks away, and then it goes back to planning. So I don't understand the extra layer, because the call comes in, it goes up to planning. Planning puts it on the agenda for planning, and they decide whether they want to, recommend that the ordinance be amended or not. And then the very next week, it can come to the township board, because they meet on opposite weeks and on opposite days. So I'm not buying the extra
I guess,
layer.
why does it go to township board after planning? Why wouldn't it go from planning to county, then township?
If it is
I'm saying, why don't they do all the work, planning, you know, get the
Because-
ordinance ready, and then come to the board at the
you
end?
have to have a public hearing.
No, I'm saying the planning does all their public hearing, does all this, I'm just saying, I feel like if it's going from the planning department to the planning commission, okay, for them to give the green light to move forward, and then it's coming to this township board to say, here's your green light, and then it's going back to planning department to get with Phil, write all the legal language, then it's gotta go back to planning, then county planning, then township board. Mr. Steiner?
I hate to throw,
No, that's not how it
put
works.
more gas on the fire, but you just said something, Paul, made me think though. If something gets sent to planning and then planning says, hey, we need to put this over on the planning commission, you will add another step on top of that, because you've gone to planning commission, to get the process started. But then if you're gonna have something that requires a public, because I just heard, let's let the subject matter experts, or the SMEs in business industry these days, SME, you don't have to know everything about everything. You are the expert in your field for the most part, as Mr. Goldsmith said. You know, it's not, I mean, there's none of us in this world that know everything we could know. But then you're gonna have to go back at some point to planning to have a hearing on top of it. So now you've got 2 times the planning commission. So there's another added step.
Well,
So, and just one thought is, because I know we've got some other things within, in our assessing and our zoning. If somebody comes in and we say it's gonna fit in an ordinance, you'll fit, okay, that packet, plan it, go to planning commission. If somebody comes in and says, we have no ordinance whatsoever for this, okay? Do it, yes, no, if, and chart, okay? If we don't have an ordinance, run that thing, that goes to township board. Do we wanna go with that? Or if it's a minor amendment, now, it's hard to classify minor, but if it's a minor amendment, Do you really need to go through planning commission for a minor amendment? No, we can push it to township board. If it's something, a major amendment, then let's use not only our planning department SMEs and make that one go to the planning commission because you've got more experts there. I don't think it would be that hard to draft that kind of flow chart to move that around. So an applicant's gonna know if he looks at it, you can show him the flow chart, say, you know what, right here, you've got a simple process, we can move it this way, and it's gonna go through these channels. If it's not a simple process, it's gonna hit a no here, so you go this way, and then we have to follow that process. I see Mr. Clements is shaking his head, yes, he gets what I'm saying, I don't know if anybody else does.
Well, and to piggyback on that, this board routinely talks about cutting fees from everything that we outsource. And the fact of the matter is our fees sitting here, whether we sit here for 2 hours or 4 hours, don't change. And so why wouldn't we, just from an initial cost-saving standpoint, at least analyze if it's minor, we determine it's minor and we make the change. If it's massive, we pass it back to planning, who are the SMEs, or they're closer to it, and we do it that way. You know, I think this is not,
When you say planning, you mean Karen and Jody, or do you mean the planning, the commission?
yes to
Because
both.
I think we need to be, so when you say us send it back to planning, you mean Karen and Jody?
Correct.
Okay.
And then they continue their path the same way they would
Right, and they
traditionally
would put the
anything else.
packet in for planning commission.
Right. Because right now, what's happening is Karen and Jody, okay, are getting a request that we don't have. They put it together, they get with legal, it goes to planning, it goes to county planning, it comes to board for final approval. That's the process right now. Nancy, you're shaking your head no. What, Ms. Stenberg?
This, I mean, with all due respect to everyone on this board, you're just leaving out the public hearing. Mr. Legal Advice, could you explain the public hearing process when you're doing a amendment to the ordinance?
Sure. The public hearing comes after,
Excuse me, but it's required.
it's required by the Zoning Enabling Act. And it comes after a proposed zoning amendment is drafted. Then the public notice goes in. We use the Monroe Evening News typically. We give the required statutory notice. The Planning Commission conducts a public hearing. The public can come in and make comments. At the conclusion of that public hearing, then our Planning Commission makes a recommendation to either, I'll just distill it down, say yes or say no. Recommend approval, recommend denial. That is a guide for this board when it ultimately gets here to act upon. After planning is done with it, as the board knows, it goes to county planning. Their staff usually drafts a memo. The Planning Commission makes a recommendation, either recommending it or recommending approval or recommending denial and the reasons therefore. Then it comes to this board, no public hearing here. You have a public meeting and the board determines whether or not to approve the amendment. That's all required by the Zoning Enabling Act.
So this expediting comment that we're talking about is 30 days for the publication, all the notices have to go, you can't slow that down, that's in the law, correct?
You can't,
We're
you
not
can't
gonna-
speed it up, you really, you can't.
They can't come to this board and say, oh, it's just simple, let's just put it through.
Oh, no.
Let's be,
No,
real
I
quick,
think what
let me
we're
answer, Bill. I
talking
wanna be
about,
clear,
I
Bill.
think what we're talking about is what happens really what I think we're talking about is what happens before it gets sent to
For the public.
the legal counsel to draft the document. What happens within that time frame? How does this board want to develop a policy as to what happens in that time frame? Because oftentimes, in the past, we've been contacted by planning who had apparent authority and said, we need to change this ordinance. And then we go through, then we draft it, and then it goes through the process required by the Zoning Enabling Act. So if the board wants to prescribe a policy as to how it even gets to us, and once it gets to me or to Tom, Graham, and I, and we work on it together, we work on it closely with Karen and Jody. We work on it together. I'll come at 8 o'clock in the morning before I go to Monroe, and we'll sit down, we'll pour over the ordinance, and we'll look at everything that is involved and come up with a plan to draft the ordinance, and we do it, in conjunction with one another. Because Karen knows these ordinances inside and out, and Jody's probably only a half step behind. You have very good employees in your planning department. So how do you want that process to get started?
Well, really, it could be the way that it is right now, without clerk, supervisor, treasurer being involved at all. Planning department gets a request saying, hey, we want a composting station. They put go to work because they have authority to call legal. They go to work, they draft it, it goes to planning, they do their hearings, and then, you know what I mean? You skip the step of going to planning, you skip the step of going to the board.
It could be, but
I'm just saying it's an option.
It's an option. I'll tell you right now, I don't like the option, because ultimately, I think you, as the elected officials of this community, need to evaluate it and approve it. I see value in both ways.
Catherine from MTA was pretty clear on the way I suggested, as far as accompanying this board first, but.
I understand that. So the board has a decision to make in formulating a policy. I understand that.
Mr. Pruitt?
Mr. Steiner?
Just to be very clear, I mean, when I said about the process I was explaining coming to this board, in no way was I saying that this board would just approve and expect it just keeps on going its merry way with a rubber stamp. Because I did say it would go back to planning. So I just want to be very clear. I wasn't talking about rubber stamping or a simple say, okay, let's just do it. Yes, we would get the review, and then we decide what direction to proceed. Send it back to planning, or deny it, saying we don't want that ordinance. No, we would not, look at that. They could still, somebody could still push for a draft of something if they wanted to, and then it would still have to go to public hearing. But, not that this board's going to make the initial decision without going through that process.
I'm just saying, as a business owner, somebody that's wanting to bring a business here, this board would give you a really quick indication of, hey, got a 7-0 vote, we want a solar field in the township. That'd give you a pretty good feeling as the business owner wanting to, so, or if it gets turned down, you go on your merry way and you don't waste 3 months of your life and money to get to this board and have them say no. So, just a thought. So what's the pleasure of the board?
I guess I'm inclined to agree that it should go to this board first, just in concept. The planning department can get the request and do their study. Does this need a board, does this need an amendment to the ordinance? Does it comply with this ordinance or not? Makes their short recommendation to this board. Do we want to proceed with that if it needs a change? If it doesn't need a change and it meets the zoning, this board doesn't have a decision to make, do they? They can't disallow it as long as it fits zoning and ordinance.
Correct.
Unless I'm.
No, the decision the board would be making is whether or not to
Proceed with amendment.
proceed forward and to direct planning and legal counsel to draft an ordinance amendment to maybe meet use or an accessory use that's not otherwise provided for in the ordinance.
Which this board would not know unless the planning department told us that.
Correct.
But just to be clear, from this board, it would go next to Karen and Jody to work with Phil and to draft everything we need to draft, then go to planning for them to make the recommendation. We wouldn't go from here to the planning commission for them to make a recommendation to move forward as well.
Right. It's the way I understand what's being
Okay.
described. so
Mr.
far.
Montrak?
Yeah, like, to go along with Paul, so pretty much, my understanding, it would take this resolution, take off the last, be it further resolved, remove anything with clerk or supervisor, and it would change it to the now therefore be it resolved, and that last line passed on to the township board for next, like, for that next, whatever, for, I don't know if you would call that for approval or what, but that's my understanding, is basically taking off that last part. It's not going to the clerk or the supervisor, and it would go all of the requests, inquiries, everything that's gonna go to the solely planning department, then pass to this board before.
Are we gonna try tonight to figure out what we want this to say, or do we wanna table this, let legal take it, tweak it the way they want it, or Ms. Teneberry or somebody, and then bring it back next meeting?
I think you better have a draft in front of you so that you can look at it.
I think we can
And-
spend an hour.
Well, that's what I'm asking,
tonight.
is what more would you need to change besides crossing that and changing that to township board? I'm asking.
I think it would be good, Craig, so that you could, before a meeting, you could look at it, digest it, and understand what it reads, rather than to try to do it on the fly here. I mean, next meeting, you could do it. I don't think there's any immediate urgency to adopt a resolution or policies are important, or resolutions, because you're telling each other, this is the way this township's gonna conduct business on these types of issues from this point forward. So you wanna have it as
Well, and the-
accurate as you
and the-
can.
And the good thing is the next board has something pretty clear to follow.
So the board has to decide, there's a couple of different options here that have been raised. Before I can draft something for your consideration, you need to decide how you wanna move forward with it.
Ms. Teneberry?
Yeah, you mentioned that you gave us this MTA general law ordinance checklist, and we just got it tonight, so I haven't had a chance to read it through, but the steps to be taken for a zoning ordinance text amendment. Number one, text amendment initiated by planning commission, township board, or citizens. So initiated by the planning commission is an option.
Nancy, what page was
It's
that
an
on?
option.
I think 5 to 12.
Why don't we get a motion to table this? We'll all take the checklist, let Phil come up with something, and then we'll have something for the next board.
He wants direction, though, correct?
Well, if you're gonna table it, when you decide how you want the policy, whether you want it to go from planning department to planning commission, who gives an opinion, then it comes here, and then you
So
direct
do we need to
planning.
make a motion on
or-
that tonight then?
No, well, if you're
I'm just
prepared
saying,
to, I just need, you need to make a decision, and Nancy is correct. An ordinance amendment or a text amendment can be initiated by a citizen. The Zoning Enabling Act provides for that, as does our ordinance. Or it can be initiated by the Planning Commission, or it can be initiated by the Township Board.
But the citizen can't direct the attorney.
No.
Because you're not an
No.
attorney for the township.
No.
You're an attorney for this board.
Absolutely.
You and Mr. Graham and Marty and,
If it's initiated by a citizen, that's what we're talking about, what happens next. Does it go to planning, and then from planning to this board, or does it go to planning, then to the planning commission, who will evaluate it, make a recommendation to this board at the next meeting, and then this board decides to engage your planning department and your legal counsel to move forward with the ordinance?
Well, from what I heard from the majority, it seemed like that it was, planning would bring it to this board, the owner-operator first, and then from there it would go back to the planning department to create it with you, make it up to where you guys are comfortable with it, and then it goes to planning commission for recommendation to county, then back from county to township board for final approval.
It would
I
take
think
this.
that's the cleanest, quickest way, and most, personally, and I think,
That's the pleasure of the board, however the board wants to do that.
and then it's out in the open pretty quick from the rip, so. Is everybody good with that? Okay, well, move forward with that.
Maybe you better, can somebody make a motion second, have some discussion and take a vote, I would feel more
Let's do
comfortable
that.
with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Do I make whatever you just said in the form of motion then?
I'll make the form with what I just said, what I just said in the form of a motion. It would go, resident business owner A would go to planning, and from planning, it would come to the
Planning what?
planning department. From the planning department, Karen and Jody, it would go to the township board for direction to move forward, yes or no, and then from there, it would go back to Karen and Jody in the planning department. And they would, work with legal, and then from planning commission, they would recommend yea or nay to county, and then from county, it would come back to the board for final. I'll make that in the form of a motion.
I'll second with the slight amendment, just to make sure that we say that even though it's in the process, but state that when it does go to the planning commission, that it would require the public hearing process before it moves on to county.
Support.
I think he supported it.
He's
Oh,
supporting
I'm sorry.
He's supporting.
My
with amendment.
apologies, I was friendly. I'm going through all the steps down here.
Can I ask, is that motion to have him draft that resolution?
That's giving him direction.
Giving Bill direction. to
Giving
draft
legal
a
direction
resolution
to
bring back to the next regular
follow.
scheduled meeting.
And then then the board would determine whether or not to adopt that resolution.
Yeah.
You're not adopting it now, it's just giving me authority to proceed under those circumstances.
You
Okay.
accept the
Any more
amendment?
discussion? I accept the amendment. Any further discussion? Seeing none, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Peroni,
Aye.
Mr. Steiner,
Aye.
Mrs. Tinnevery,
I'm voting no, and I'd like the minutes to reflect that I do not believe this takes the politics out of the process.
Mr. Clemens,
Aye.
Mr. Montry,
Aye.
and Mr. Francis.
I'll vote aye, and I guess I just don't understand the comment about taking politics out of it.
Me neither.
We're trying to establish just a working order, if you will, on how we're gonna handle these things in the future. Seems like we don't know if we need an amendment to the ordinance until the planning department tells us. This doesn't quite fit. We might need to adjust that. They bring it to the board, do you want to go forward with that or not? Send it right back, yes or no? If it's yes, then they go ahead and complete the process and come back later, and the board obviously approves it again, or disapproves it. I don't know how it takes the politics out or puts it in. We're not supposed to be making political decisions. We're supposed to be making decisions for the betterment of the residents in the township as a whole. Forget politics. And I wasn't implying that you were saying the opposite of that.
Well,
I wasn't implying that.
You can imply it because
Okay. Did you call the roll, or did you already call the roll?
Yeah, that would be a motion.
Okay, it's 5-1.
All right, I'll have a proposed resolution for the board's consideration at the next meeting.
Okay, item 8F, discussion regarding township ordinance enforcement on farm animals and residential zoning. Ms. Tinneberry?
Yes, I met with Jody Rector from the Planning Department and Damon Cecil, our head of the Ordinance Department, regarding this discussion of these ordinances that have come up at Planning Commission. And my understanding from Mr. Cecil is that there's difficulty enforcing some of the lack of wording in some of the ordinances, and I'm using this one that he felt was the most urgent. People that want chickens in residential zoning. The people, he sends the ordinance to them saying that you can't have chickens in residential zoning, and when they want to see it in the ordinance, there is no wording in the ordinance that says you can't have chickens. in the residential zoning. However, the way it's been enforced over the years is that if it doesn't allow it, you can't have it. That's not understood by people who want it, and I can understand their perspective as well. If you don't want me to have chickens, then say I can't have chickens, or pigs, or whatever. We have how many dogs you can have without having a kennel. And so there's a wording in other ordinances that he's found that says specifically what can and can't be. So the ordinance department, as I said, was just a discussion. The supervisor is the elected official responsible, or that the ordinance department answers to or meets with or whatever. Is the ordinance department is under the supervisor in our organizational chart. So possibly he has more to say about this, but I would like us to consider simply changing some of the wording that allows the ordinance department. This is just one example. I intend to bring an example at each meeting because it's just a simple matter of the intent is already there. It's just adding the wording to allow them to have a little more teeth in enforcement.
Yeah, Nancy's right. A lot of our ordinances, and we've seen the same thing with driveways, where it says, we had to change it to where, it didn't really specify driveway or a ditch or whatever. So, we need to be very clear with our ordinances what you can and can't do. So this is one of those. It does say only in agricultural you can have chickens, but it doesn't say you can't in residential. So we just want to be clear with that you can't in residential. So, the problem is with residential is the neighborhoods. There's properties out there, residential, that, some of them are 2, 4, 6 acres. I mean, I don't see, personally, I don't see a problem with having chickens on 6 acres of residential if you have 6 acres, but the problem would be in the neighborhoods with the chickens.
Well, that'd be similar to, other types of animals, horses, whatever. You have to have a certain amount of acreage. So again, that's that gray area that's not spelled out. That I agree that, and I did bring that up a little bit ago when we were talking about the previous issue about things that may be implied, but they're not stated. So unfortunately, there's many people that are gonna try to find the way to get there. I mean, the least path of resistance thing, they're gonna try to find that way around it. And so they're gonna try to say, well, it doesn't say I can't do it.
And then we have to be careful too with acreage, because there's neighborhoods with
Right.
7, 10 acres. We've got those out there. Ms. Tenenberry?
Well, I'm not advocating one way or the other with regard to this. I think that a decision has to be made as to what kind of a township we want. There are townships, cities that allow chickens. Ann Arbor allows chickens. I mean, it's the younger generation that wants to have their free range, peck off the ground, chickens lay some eggs, and they can furnish their own chickens. I don't personally see a problem with having chickens in a residential zoning, as long as there are other, you have to keep them in a pen, they can't run into the neighbor's yard. I mean, as long as there's other factors that we can put to protect the neighbors as well. But I'm just saying that when it's not stated one way or the other, or there's no limitations put on how many chickens you can have. Maybe you could have some chickens but no rooster. I'm all in favor of no rooster. I mean, I don't want to be woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning with a crowing. So I think that there should be no rooster, but it's something that I think we should discuss. I'm not saying that we're going to come to a decision tonight, but I do want to be able to, for the supervisor to explain to Damon or Mr. Cecil what the board intends to do. Do we want to make minor, wording changes, or you want to leave it alone? But my problem is he needs some guidance. He needs some assistance to be able to to explain either why or why not to the residents.
Mr. Steiner?
Well, I agree, and I think that, again, if Mr. Cecil's gonna go through these and he sees these that have the gray area, be the same way. Needs to be highlighted, needs to be run up through the channels of, does this board want to look at amending those ordinances? Again, that was a very simple one. Do you want chickens or not in a residential area? Pretty simple. And if your rooster crows at 5, Nancy, he's too late, 'cause I'm gonna
You
get
should-
him up before that.
Well,
Well, that is the problem. That's the calls for chickens initiate from a rooster, 9 times out of 10 in the township.
Well,
you don't have to have a rooster to lay eggs.
No, I'm saying when we get a complaint,
calls.
9 times out of 10 it's because of the rooster.
well, and,
Look at all the roosters you're gonna put out of business.
yeah. The other thing too is, and again, not to get too detailed, but, sometimes you get these animals too, and when people don't take care of their property. I mean, I see things out there that properties have a scent and they don't even have animals. Now, if you start allowing animals within, residential subdivisions, things like that, you start to have scents coming from different types of animals, so then you've got another issue to deal with. So we need to be very clear, and I think if Mr. Cecil was to take the ordinances that have these gray areas, bring it up, and then we make that determination, do we go for a amendment?
Is this something the board wants to have Phil draft, or are we taking what Ms. Tinneberry did here? And what are we doing with it?
What do you think, Nancy? I think that we could let, let Damon go through these and have him bring it up. I mean, I don't see why.
Well, he's already gone through this one. Phil,
Well, that's one.
I mean, Phil, you guys have looked at this one already, right? The chicken one? Or
Yeah.
Tom has?
Depends on the pleasure of the board again.
No, I'm saying you guys have had this one, though. You guys have,
We have looked at it, but the board needs to let us know what you want to do, because it requires a zoning ordinance amendment to be drafted, and then the public hearing like we've been discussing, so.
Well, I mean, the thing is, we should look and, sort of decide what we want the attorney to put in that we do or don't want too, instead of him draft it, and then we say, well, we want this, no, we don't want that.
I mean, alls Damon has said is it's got to be clear that no residential. I talked to him about property sizes, he was against it, but I told him he
Well,
just wants it to be very clear that says no residential
And,
chicken.
and nothing against Mr. Cecil, but that's where you said he is against it. We can't have him against something. It has to be a recommendation that has come up, comes to this board, and then we are the ones that have to decide whether we are for or against something.
Yep.
And then we can proceed.
But that's all he has is the change. He just wants to state it clear, no chickens in residential.
Yeah, if this is already, if that's all, but
That's, yeah.
Mr. Goldsmith, since you've seen it, is there anything else that's gray in that particular ordinance that you feel needs to be tweaked?
If we're going to amend that ordinance, yeah, there's some other, Tom and I have discussed it, there's some other changes that we would recommend, again, to make it clearer for enforcement purposes and clearer for our residents to understand what's allowed, what's not allowed, and what the circumstances are. So once you start to work on these and you think of, you try to think of the scenarios for enforcement, and then you see things as you work through
It has
it.
to be a pattern.
Yeah. So if the board's pleasure is to amend the ordinance so that chickens, roosters cannot be harbored, housed, kept in residentially zoned districts, then that's what we do. But I hear some competing, there's other options too.
Now, when we create that ordinance that says no chickens in residential period, does that supersede the Farming Act? Because the Farming Act says
Well, that's
you
what's
can.
that's where the challenge is going to come, so we have to draft it carefully, because if we're gonna get challenged on it, it will be from right to farm.
Well, we have one right now that it is, so I mean, it's,
Well, that's an
basically, if
ag-
you're
that's an
within so
ag
many
business.
houses and you're in, residential, you can have this many chickens, this many goats, this many, so I just want to be clear of that, because we have talked about that a lot. Do we supersede the right to farm act?
yes and no. Depends on what district you're in, depends on the circumstances. So if the board didn't want chickens to be allowed in residentially zoned areas, then we would have to draft it carefully, knowing that the challenge that would come would more than likely be based upon or premised upon the Right to Farm Act.
Okay. Ms. Tinnery?
Well, with all due respect, Mr. Goldsmith, you know I love you, but we need to have this expedited. We need, I mean, you just said that you've had it. So if the board approves this tonight and approves the attorney drafting the language, I would like to see a time limit put on that. I would like to see that when these ordinance changes come before the board, that we designate a meeting that we want to have, be able to, well, I guess, no, you'd have to go to planning, but a time limit, and so that it gets to planning in a timely manner.
You mean like when we were told Thursday that we needed an ordinance amendment and we had it the following Tuesday?
Oh, come on, come on. One time does not create a,
Oh, I can give you many other instances.
okay,
But you tell me, first of all, you have to tell us what you want. And if you don't want chickens in residentially zoned areas, then that gives us clarity, and then we can do it. And then you can tell us when you want it by, and we'll operate under those rules.
Well, I can tell you this, if we are going to have chickens in residential, it's gonna open up a big can of worms, because you're gonna have to be very careful with how you draft it at that point. You know what I mean, with
Well,
the
sure,
size of the
yeah.
property and how many, and,
Oh, if you
You know,
decide that you want to allow, yeah.
because right now, we don't. I mean, they fight that we don't. I mean, there's,
It's the board's
so-
pleasure as to how you want us to draft it, but.
because this isn't a new thing. We don't allow chickens in residential. We're not, this isn't something we're just bringing up right now. It's just a language argument, period. We don't allow chickens in residential, haven't in how many years, Phil? I mean, it's,
Many, many years.
either way, it'll probably be headlined in the news. that
Many
Bedford's
years.
stopping chickens in residential, but this isn't something we're just doing now.
Mr. Supervisor?
Yeah.
I'm gonna make a motion, but I'm gonna ask for Ms. Tinberry's help here. I'm gonna make a motion that the document that Attorney Goldsmith and his team have in hand is to go ahead and review, to get that document updated, that states that there would not be chickens in residential, and as I also stated earlier, Mr. Goldsmith, there's a couple other tweaks which he's got an idea, I believe, of how he should present it to make sure the township is covered in all angles, especially with the Right to Farm Act issue that could be used. And have that brought back, and I'll ask you for a fair time frame. I don't know if you can do it by the next July meeting or the 1st of August meeting.
Let's go with the August meeting. It's gonna take some time to
Right.
draft this one.
Okay, so we'll do that, and then I'll ask my friend over here for any,
I'll support that with the addition of adding these definitions as stated in this,
in the box.
yeah.
You have that document, Mr. Goldsmith, on
Yeah.
the second page.
We have a motion and support by Ms. Tinberry. Discussion? I just want to thank Nancy for taking her time and coming in with working Damon on some of these ordinances that, I mean, Damon has been going through all of these. I mean, that's part of his job that I've told him. I said, go through these ordinances and find out what we need to tweak. And let's get them, before the board, get them to Phil, and let's make it happen. And he has. He's worked on a lot of them. I mean, I think, Phil, you guys have quite a few of them right now that we're trying to, to work on, but I appreciate Nancy taking the time to move them forward and put her thoughts to them, so. Could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Tinneberry?
Aye.
Mr. Montry?
Aye.
Mr. Clemens?
Aye.
Mr. Francis?
Aye.
and Mr. Peroni.
Aye, the motion passed 6-0. Okay. Number 9, comments from the public. Comments limited to 5 minutes. If you have a comment, come on up to the microphone. I was looking at him like you had a comment. You might have something. Thank you for being here, by the way, too.
Hold on, yeah.
Just state your name and address, and
My name is Adria Alexio, and I just wanted to say that you all did great today in debating,
thank you.
and have a good day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for
Could you
calling
give us
it
your address,
debating.
please?
1448 West Temperance Road.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any more comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, moving on to comments from township board members. Ms. Kinderberry?
Just a couple of things. One in 8B, where we moved to rezone, I would like to ask that the assessing department move quickly to finish that land division so that they're not held up. It's been quite a while that they've been waiting, so. And that would be through the supervisor, correct? To talk to the assessing department to move that along.
Has it been longer than 45 days? They only give 45 days.
It's been 2018 in the minutes when it started, but no, not since they finally got everything together, no.
Okay.
It hasn't been 45 days. And then finally, since Mr. Francis asked, I'd like to explain what I mean by taking the politics out of it. We all have friends. Some of us have lived here many years and have lots of friends. So your friends come to you and they want you to do something on their behalf. We know lots of realtors. Realtors have clients that want our ordinances changed so that they can accommodate their client to be able to move forward and do what they want to do. However, it's not in our ordinance. It's something that we haven't approved. These ordinances have been in place for a long, long time, but now all of a sudden, someone wants to bring something to town that is not approved in our ordinance. The planning department tells them, no, that doesn't meet our ordinance. The township board is all elected by popular vote. The planning commission is not elected. The planning commission is appointed. They have no political favors, no political agenda. They look at the ordinance based on what they have seen over the years or over the time of other developments coming in and either being accepted or rejected. So the politics I'm talking about is the politics of an elected board. And I've been involved in politics for 25 years. And I know you all know, I'm not telling you anything, maybe some people don't want to admit it, but there is politics that goes on in decision-making in this township and every township and city that I've ever been aware of. Politics is just part of I'm not saying it's always politics, I'm saying that politics does go on with regard to decisions that are made in government. So that's my explanation.
Mr. Clemens?
Just two things real quickly. I wanted to say congratulations to the park board for successful fireworks. I think everybody had a really good time. The weather was phenomenal. And this year, the fireworks were amazing, as they always are. So congratulations to them. Since we're talking about fireworks, just a cautionary that as we come up on the 4th of July, I know everybody likes to get out and have a good time, but please be careful. And at a minimum, please make sure you're supervising young ones. What can turn into a lot of fun and a family get-together can be an emergency within seconds. So with that said, I hope everybody has a good 4th of July. Thank you.
Mr. Montre?
I guess, just make a comment on 8E, that I think it may seem like a lot of, I think to audience member or whatever, that may seem like a lot of wasted time talking about a whole lot of nothing, that how important is that? Don't you have more important things to do kind of thing? And I just wanted to say that I appreciate the time and delineation and thought that this board's putting into something like just properly legislating process for something like that, which will in turn be for boards to come and whatnot, that's set in place and done properly. And just that I appreciate that and the little things. The other thing is for 8F, I hesitated on that. I guess it's just because we can write it up and we can figure when it's not enacted. But just that I'm curious how that will look, just because I believe that there are exceptions to that, especially in Bedford Township to say in a residential property, that you would not be allowed to have animals on your private property. I just think that there's exceptions to that, and so I'm like interested in seeing that, and I'll probably do some reading on that, but that's all.
Mr. Steiner?
Once again, I'm going to reference my friend over here, Ms. Tinnery, when he was her line that we can, or Mr. Francis too, that we can agree to disagree. I think that, I actually think that 8E, we are taking any potential politics out, because, and I'm going to break it down, so if somebody comes into Township Hall, that's where they're going to come to, for the most part. I mean, yes, they could come to one of us as a trustee, but they're generally going to come to Township Hall first. It's not going to be a decision of Mr. Francis. It's not going to be a decision of Mrs. Hirschberger or Mr. Peroni. It's going to go right to planning. And the reason I say it takes the political process out, because then planning, as Ms. Timber said, planning and planning commission, they don't have political agendas. And I'll be honest with you, I'll say for the most part, this board doesn't have political agendas. I will not say 100%. Some do, some don't. But I think then when it comes from the planning back to here, to me, the politics has to go away, because somebody might think they can try to do a favor for somebody, but they are one vote. And if we feel that, one person or two people might be politically inclined to do something, because you got 5 more votes that could go completely the opposite way. So I think it really is a true political process, but more of a democratic process that says, the other 5 may say, I see through it. I'm not going to let it be political. So that's just my take on it. I know where Ms. Tinbury's coming from, because things do happen. So I just think it takes it out. The next item, fireworks, I just want to say, please respect your neighborhood and respect your citizens. If you're shooting off fireworks, I myself have had numerous occasions, I don't appreciate fireworks landing on the top of my home or in my yard, everything scattered all over my property. Please respect other people. The other thing I'm going to say is, you are not allowed to block a roadway to shoot off fireworks. I've seen that in a few different subdivisions. That is illegal. And if I see it or I get a call about it and it has not been done already, I will call the fire chief personally myself to have his team act on it. Because you just don't close roads. If you wanted to close a road for an event, you have to go through proper channels to try to close a road for an event. And good chance it probably wouldn't be approved. Other than that, please have a safe 4th with the fireworks. But I also know it's summertime. It's now getting to finally have warmer weather. People do like to party a little bit, like to drink. There's way too many accidents in this township already. Don't add to it by drinking and driving and adding more statistics that we don't want.
Mr. Francis?
One thing to mention, I'm sure everyone that owns property already knows this, the tax bills went out last Friday, and you probably got them already. I don't want to add to our smoke shoveling tonight. Everything that was said was legitimate. I think everybody has concerns. I think we're all trying to aim in the same direction. We'll get there. But sometimes we do shovel a lot of smoke in that process.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
Trudy would just like to remind all the residents that the township will be closed both Thursday the 4th and Friday the 5th for Independence Day, and she wishes everyone a safe holiday and some time with your families.
Talking about the proactive ordinance, I've been talking to Damon about this for a long time now. I feel like we should be proactive. And a couple examples why, and I just had an example just moving into a neighborhood. I asked a neighbor, in the neighborhood, I asked if they could not park directly across the sidewalk. I said, I have a 2-year-old that's on training wheels trying to ride safely down the sidewalk. And I was told no. So, and then I was asked that I'd not use my political power to get him a ticket. So right there, it gives a resident, puts you in an awkward position with that resident when it could be is a policeman, because the policeman should be acting on sidewalk blockages, and the ordinance should be acting on basketball hoops being on sidewalks. I mean, there's 15 basketball hoops on sidewalks in our neighborhood. So if they're proactive, they go around, they see these things, they put a sign on the door. And it's that simple, and, when a neighbor has to ask you, they tell you no, now you have a confrontation with a neighbor, over something silly. So I believe, it's tough to be proactive on all ordinances, but things that are clear, sidewalks that are heaved up this far, and basketball hoops on sidewalks, just simpler stuff, campers parked out in somebody's front yard. We should stop and be proactive on those things. And we're not. We're complaint-based only. So Damon has said it'd be tough with the staff they have to constantly be out there, going from one door to the next, because there's a lot of violations out there. So it's something we need to definitely think about. And to, the politics, at the end of the day, no matter what happens throughout the process, at the end of the day, this board in public makes the final decision. No matter what you or anybody on this board says to anybody or how you act with them, at the end of the day, this board gets to make the decision with 7 people on it. And I think the process we're putting in place, I really appreciate Nancy bringing it forward. It's clean and clear. There'll be a resolution for it, and I think it'll be good at the end of the day. So I appreciate that. The maintenance building is done, behind the lines done. Dalventhal did a really nice job. I was there today. So the roundabout, we are talking with the developer, not the developer, but the real estate and the owner of the property, negotiating on them paying for phase 2 study. They did come back this week, and I got Mr. Francis on the line. Anytime I have conversations with them, I grab Paul. The board did tell me they want both of us. So anyways, they want to make sure that the 55-gallon drum that is on the property where the area is kind of spongy around it, they want to make sure that's on their property. They have concerns that it's not. So Manigan Smith was going over there to kind of take a look to make sure that that is on their property. And then we'll move forward with the negotiation of who's paying for the phase 2 study. They are going to work with us, it sounds like, but they would take the money for the phase 2 off the price, because the whatever's broke fund that they have in place. So look for that. We're keeping moving forward on that. Road projects in Bedford Township are in full swing. Whiteburg Center Road's being worked on right now. They're doing all the drainage. So they're working hard on that. And then we had a very successful business summit. We had about 80 people show up. We had former Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley come speak, and he's the Small Business Association president right now, so it was a great time. I think we're going to keep doing a yearly one, so that's it. Anybody have any thoughts or concerns? Seeing none, we stand adjourned.